Hi guys, welcome to the first episode in a little series of interviews I'll be doing with traditional musicians. Today's guest is a world famous whistle player and uilleann piper from Ireland. He's toured all over the world, taught in countless summer schools, and he's released 8 studio albums. And on top of all this, he's been a really huge inspiration to a lot of whistle players and pipers around the world, including myself. So Brian Hughes, welcome to the studio. It's great to have you on.
Thanks, Rune. Yeah, it's lovely to be here in Denmark. It really is. It's lovely.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So I'd like to know a little bit about your musical upbringing. Maybe you could tell us why you chose the whistle and the uilleann pipes as your instruments.
Yeah. Well, I suppose I was born and reared in Ireland, and would have been introduced to music at a very young age, really, because my grandfather was a good musician, and he had a huge interest into music. So I suppose even at home I was being introduced to music from such a very, very young age. And you know, it's very common at home that people would start playing music on a whistle. So you know, at home we used to be playing, I'd be playing the whistle, I'd be playing the harmonica, just playing instruments, whatever instruments were there at the time. And I just developed obviously a huge love of the whistle. Now as I got a bit older, maybe 10 or 12 years of age, I developed a huge interest in the uilleann pipes, and kind of just went from there, really. You know, I was always kind of working on my whistle playing anyway, and it was a very natural progression. Also played flute for a while, and for me it was just a natural progression then to start playing the pipes, and that just led me to a career and a life really of whistle and uilleann piping.
Fantastic.
And I didn't kind of move away from those instruments then. They became my main instruments.
Right, nice.
Over time.
And did you have a teacher, or how did you learn to play the instruments?
Yeah, no, I would never have, well, first of all, I would say the whistle. I would have never had a lesson on the whistle. So I would have been completely self-taught.
Wow.
So that would have been purely from listening to recordings when I was younger. And then of course when you become old enough to be going out playing in sessions and stuff like that, you're going to meet so many other musicians, and you're constantly learning from them and learning from their music. But no, to actually sit down and have a lesson, I would have never had a lesson on the whistle. Now I suppose as I developed, and as I say, when I got a little older, I was playing the pipes. And I was attending the People Uilleann in Dublin, the Pipers Club there. And I would have went there only really for maybe 6 or 8 months, once a week, once a fortnight, just to kind of get you in on the basics of the actual kind of mechanics of the pipes, if you like. But and again, after that then I wouldn't have been really in a position to be taking lessons regularly. So really my piping would have been self-taught also, yeah.
Oh, very cool. Did you have any musical heroes that you were inspired by?
Oh, sure, look, of course, there was so many.
Yeah.
So many, like, you know, when I was growing up, you were listening to recordings of your musical heroes, and if you were lucky, maybe get to see them playing at some sessions or festivals or somewhere. So, like, I mean, when I was growing up, the Body Band had just finished. So, of course, we were listening through the recordings of the Body Band. Planksty at that time were just kind of finished. You know, they were the original kind of, they split up 75, 76 or whatever. So again, we would have been listening to their albums all the time through the 70s. And then I suppose when I was kind of getting old enough to understand and really listen to the bands, I suppose Stockton's Wing were big at that time, late 70s, early 80s, and Moving Hearts, of course. I remember going to see Moving Hearts gigs and stuff. So there was a great scene at that time with some of these musicians coming up, and those guys would have been, I suppose anybody that come up through traditional Irish music were heavily influenced by those musicians. And I suppose particularly myself being so involved in the whistle playing and always wanting to get a set of pipes, you know, at home and stuff, that of course I was particularly drawn to those great players like Paddy Keenan and you know, that wonderful legato travelling style that he played with and still does, And then, of course, the great Liam O'Flynn. Unfortunately, we lost Liam a couple of years ago. But his style was so different. And I suppose, been nurtured by all those different styles. And then, of course, in the late 70s, on the whistle end of things, Mary Bergen released her album 78 or 79. And I still remember trying to learn the tunes from that album.
Would you have learned all the tunes, or how did you go about it?
Yeah, well, would you believe it? I actually remember being so young, like when that album came out in the late 70s, that I was constantly trying to learn the tunes. But I think the first tunes I would have learned from it were the slow airs, because I was at that level that I could kind of learn the slow airs by ear from the tape that we had at the time, and possibly there was a lovely set of hornpipes on that album, I remember. And I remember learning those at home as well. And then gradually, I suppose, we were able to learn the jigs and the reels from the album, But so, of course, Mary Bergen's album, anyone that was, I suppose, young whistle players at that time that heard that album were deeply moved by that album. And,
even still to this day, I think
she was
it's
a huge
really important album for whistle players.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then Donald O'Brien released his album, I think only a couple of years after that. And I remember listening to that album, and then a few years later, I was in the Pipers Club, of course, and would see Mick O'Brien and Donnacha and stuff like that. And when I was in Milltown, I remember meeting Donnacha, and he would have been a big influence on my whistle playing as well. I suppose really all these recording musicians of the time, as is the case now, kids are influenced by what they hear on CDs and albums and concerts and stuff. So yeah, we were very much the same.
Fantastic. You had yesterday you told me a funny little story about how you played the pipes along to these albums.
Yeah, well, that's right.
You'd be up for telling that story here.
That's right. Yeah, it was when you'd be listening to Moving Hearts, where that very famous Moving Hearts album would have come out when I was only kind of 10 years of age, 10, 11, and that amazing recording of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I mean, I kind of still remember throwing the album on at home when we got this brand new album and just listening to Hiroshima and Nagasaki and Keith Donald's sax going into Davy Spillan's pipes and stuff, and you're just sitting there imagining at that stage, because you're so small, so you're playing the air pipes really,
Fantastic.
And instead of playing the air guitar.
Yeah, exactly.
So
that's brilliant.
It would have been around that time that I got my first practice set. So then it just went from there,
Fantastic. Great
memories, I suppose. Great. And music filled childhood really, listening and meeting musicians and stuff. Of course, Clonard, I just loved Clonard, from the time they released their first album, kind of mid-70s, early 70s. We would have lived for their music. They were a huge inspiration, and although they weren't playing, I would say, purely traditional music, they had a huge influence on many musicians at that time, I think, as well. So, and great influences to have, great influences to have.
Great. Like, speaking of records and all that, you've actually just released a new CD.
Yeah.
Called When the Wind Blows Wild.
Yeah.
We'll shoot.
There it is, yeah.
Shoot here.
Yeah, it's a couple of months back.
Really beautiful album.
Oh, thank you.
Lots of great tunes, great playing, and you've got some amazing musicians playing on it as well.
Yeah.
Apart from yourself, of course.
Yeah. Some wonderful musicians, yeah.
Absolutely. Can you tell us a little bit maybe about your thoughts behind the album, and maybe also about your collaboration with McNeela Instruments?
Yeah.
Because you collaborated with them.
Yeah, which was fantastic, really, I suppose, Rune, I had been involved in just posting some videos online with different whistles, and I really seemed to click with the wild Irish whistle that McNeela were just kind of bringing out at the time, and they're a beautiful range of whistles, and I was playing them at home, and I put up some videos online just to kind of play a few tunes on the whistles and give my comments on them and stuff, but they really became fairly popular online, and then we just spoke, myself and McNeela Music, about the possibility of making an album and using the whistles, to record on them, and just to see kind of what result we could get. in the recording studio. And at that time, to be honest, I wasn't going down the road of recording another Whistle album. There was another project coming up that I was meant to work on, and hopefully we'll do that now. It's just going to be about 2 years later than I'd expected. But after speaking to the guys in McNeela's, you know, I really was, I was moved by kind of what they wanted to achieve and what they wanted to do with the album. And so we agreed to do the album, and I started to work then on another Whistle album. So I suppose from the very start we wanted it really as a Whistle-led project, but a very musical project. Because the album I'd done before that was the duet album, which is mostly uilleann pipes and fiddle. And I really fell in love with the whole kind of technique of playing duets and playing tightly with duets, possibly trio situation, and wanted to kind of bring some of that into this album as well. So that's what we did. We brought in some great musicians and centred it around some of the duets. So really, more than a Whistle album, I suppose it's a more accurate description to say it's a Whistle-led album, really, you know. So
yeah.
But look, so far it's received some great reviews all over the world, and everyone seems to be very happy with it, you know. So that's always nice, like, you know.
It's a really nice, really good album.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
I can really recommend it.
People have enjoyed it, I think, and so that's good, you know.
Fantastic.
And we got great results from the whistles in the studio. You know, they recorded so easily, very little work, very little engineering. It's just as they are almost. So
they sound really good on the recordings.
Yeah, and luckily some of the really good musicians that I'd hoped to work with agreed to come along and play. So that's always lovely, you know, to work with. So you know, it's one of the greatest things that music has brought me over my whole life, really, is the opportunity to meet and be with some of the best musicians in the world. And that's always a huge thrill. I think it's one of the most important things for me, is that I've got the opportunity to play with some great musicians who you just prefer to almost sit and listen to play. Yeah. Because it's just lovely to be in their company, you know.
It's amazing how music just opens so many doors, isn't it?
Yeah, it really does, I suppose. Yeah, it's great.
Now we've just been touring in Denmark together, actually, for about a week and a half, and it's been really great. We've done a tour with Andreas Tophøy and Alan Costello.
That's right, yeah.
And during the tour, you've been listening a lot to music.
Yeah.
You know, whenever you've had time, maybe in the car, or whenever basically you had time.
Yeah.
And you told me that, you know, it's kind of a way of practicing for you, or you're choosing tunes for a new album.
Yeah.
So maybe you could, you know, tell us a little bit about, how do you actually choose tunes for a new album?
Yeah. You know, it's a hugely important aspect, I think, of any musician's or singer's kind of preparation is material. For me, it's all based on the material you select at that time. But I suppose going right back to even when I was very young, I was always kind of just a natural tune collector. I always loved hearing new tunes and trying different types of tunes on different instruments. And I think even more importantly than the material choice, you know yourself from, I'm sure, playing your own instrument, Rune, that some tunes, they could be a great tune, but they just may not sit really nicely on your instrument.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's very much the same, I suppose, with all instruments. For me, it's really that way with the whistle and pipes, that there are some tunes just seem to fit, I suppose, firstly on your particular instrument, but most importantly, that they would suit your particular style of playing.
Totally.
You know, I've heard other whistle players and pipers playing pieces of music, and they make them sound incredible, and I know I just couldn't do that because that piece of music may not just suit my style. So I think selecting material is really important, but I would kind of be a natural collector all the time, even if I wasn't working for a particular project, you know. And you were saying about practicing. I suppose I always find I get far more work achieved maybe when I'm listening more than playing, because I think we can't listen enough to music and other musicians, and
we'll definitely also go into that a little later in the interview, because I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, it's so important.
If people want to have an insight into how the album was made, there's a really good documentary made on it. 5-part documentary which you can find on YouTube. and it's really, really well made, I have to say. It comes across as like so professional.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a bit about how it was made and how was it possible to make a documentary that looks like it was produced by the BBC basically or something like that, you know?
Yeah. No, I was really lucky. McNeela Musical Instruments are just great people, and they really have the love of music and the distribution of musical instruments at heart. And when I started collaborating with them, they had a guy working with them, and Phil is just the most amazing videographer, and documentary making is actually his background. So they kind of decided to just leave Phil with us when we were recording the album. So he spent so much time with us in the studio and in my hometown, and we went into some of the preparation of the album and stuff like that. But it was a lovely project, like you said to me, Rune, to kind of fill people in on some of the, I suppose, areas in actually recording an album that people may not be familiar with, that haven't done it before. So people did find it as a very interesting watch that way. And you were just speaking to me about it earlier, and I think we achieved that in itself. It's kind of maybe the first documentary that was made possibly about actually going into studio and recording a traditional Irish music album, you know.
Yeah.
So and I know I'm going to the States later this year to be involved in one of the festivals out there, and one of the things I'm actually doing is I'm doing a kind of a lecture class or whatever, if you like, a presentation on the making of a traditional Irish music album. So that'll be interesting to hear what the students' comments are, and general. There's always so many questions people have to ask that, and some great musicians out there that maybe haven't had the opportunity to record, and that's a pity too, But no, the documentary went really well, and it was quite enjoyable, But lucky enough to work with these great people in McNeela's, and it was purely down to their vision really that allowed us to do that, So I can't take any credit for that, I'm afraid. It's down to these guys, the videographers, the people involved in McNeela were brilliant. Yeah,
amazing. Yeah. Well, it's really worth a watch. It's so well made, and it's really interesting to get an insight in your thoughts behind the album and how you picked the tunes and the musicians that you were bringing in and all these things.
Huge aspect of recording as well is, if you are going to work with accompaniment, selecting the people that you would like to work with for that particular project. And it's not that one musician is better than the other, they're all amazing musicians, but it's just maybe, it's a style thing, that you just might feel that a musician might be better suited to this particular project than the last project, and vice versa. But it's a really interesting aspect too, what makes two musicians click in a studio or in a live situation, as we've been working together for the last week or so here in Denmark. It's always interesting.
You told me that you don't read sheet music, so in that sense I'd say, like, in my eyes, you're a real traditional player, actually.
Yeah.
At least as we look at it here in Denmark in some way.
Yeah.
So you would have learned all your music by ear, basically, which I think is really amazing, actually. I think it would be interesting to know how you learn tunes.
Yeah.
How do you go about it?
I would never have read sheet music as a very young child at home, obviously, but we were still playing music, like. But then as I went forward, just getting a little bit older and stuff, in school there was a band in school, kind of a brass band kind of thing, and I was playing flute, silver flute, like classical flute, and they were introducing us to start reading music. So I never would have been encouraged to read music within the traditional Irish music world anyway. And I myself then, when I started becoming, a little better at sight reading and looking at sheet music and stuff like that, I would have always felt a huge restriction there. And the youngest day I ever was, I couldn't figure out why I had to play what was written on the sheet. And why I couldn't explore different avenues even as I was playing. But I suppose particularly when I'd be preparing at home and practicing and stuff, and that never sat comfortably with me. I'd always looked upon it as nothing, only a strictness and a huge restriction, which I suppose music should never be, you know. And within the traditional world, you were always kind of encouraged to learn by ear. So really, when you learn by ear, you're only coming away with the bare bones of the tune. But then it's over the coming weeks when you're playing the tune that you will take it in whatever direction your style naturally brings you. And that's where that huge and lovely creativity within traditional Irish musicians, I suppose, comes. Yeah. So reading sheet music, I would never even dream of it, or never really dreamt of it. It just wouldn't be part of my makeup. It wouldn't be part of my musical background. And look, there's absolutely nothing wrong with reading music. It's a great skill to have and a huge advantage. But just for me, personally, I was never comfortable being restricted to what was on the sheet.
And you know, I think it makes sense because you did a workshop the other day for some of my students.
Which was great, really brilliant.
It was, and they were very happy with it. And I remember that you told them that, you know, you can even adapt the tune to suit your own playing.
Of course.
You know, if there's a little phrase that's hard for you or something like that, you know, just kind of make it your own.
Absolutely.
Which is sort of part of the tradition that you come from anyway, isn't it?
Oh yeah. Oh God, absolutely. You know, and I mean, even with different musical instruments, that may have to happen. Maybe a fiddle player, or a whistle player, a piper, whatever. But it's lovely to have the freedom that you're not totally restricted to playing these kind of perfect notes. And I find it like in Ireland with traditional Irish musicians who've been living in the music all their lives, it's no problem. But I find teaching in different countries in the world, sometimes students find it very difficult. They want to know which way is the right way and which way is the wrong way. So we'll say if I teach them a tune during the day, and of course they go home that night and put it into YouTube, and they get 20 different versions of that particular tune, and they're all different. So they're coming back in the next morning maybe and they're saying, but you taught me this way, but I've listened to a version on YouTube, and which one is right and which one is wrong? Yeah. Or maybe ornamentations or variations in tunes. And some of them just can't get it into their head that there's no right or wrong. It's a hugely fluent thing.
Yeah, and would you always play a tune in a different way every time you play it, or would you have like sort of a structure or something like that? This is the tune, and then sometimes you go away and do a little variation, or would it be different every time you play it?
It'd be different. I doubt if you could ever play a tune the same way twice, really. Yeah, because as you're playing the music, even at that stage, different things are coming into your mind, and who you're playing the music with hugely influences that. Mm-hmm. Because you're getting a vibe off the musicians you're playing with, which will actually lead you to play in maybe a particular style, or throw in a particular ornamentation, or like to vary the tune in a particular place, or harmonise with the musician you're playing with. So I think the musicians you're playing with at that very moment in time have a huge influence on your playing.
Totally.
Yeah, and that's something I'm very interested in too. It's back, I suppose, to the duet playing. How much do you gain and how much do you lose in your own music makeup to have it nice and tight with the other? It's that clash is very interesting at times, so yeah. Some people find it very difficult to kind of understand that there is no right or wrong. Yeah. And I suppose that's the huge joy of traditional Irish music for me.
Yeah, and I think that's where it kind of differs from, let's say, classical music. Not that there's anything wrong with classical music, but it's usually written down,
Yeah.
So that's also why I was interested in the whole thing about not reading sheet music.
Yeah.
Because I guess it does give you more freedom in some way.
Yeah. Yeah, and look, I would have learned as a kid, I learned from people who whistled tunes to me, who lilted tunes to me. So it wasn't always passed from instrument to instrument, which is fascinating in itself. So you can imagine the variations that are in tunes when somebody sits down to lilt the tune to you, and then you're going to take it slightly differently as well. So the music is constantly evolving, constantly changing, but always in that tune scenario, So yeah, you'll see huge variations of different tunes at home. Yeah,
very nice. I suppose many of the people out there listening to this interview actually won't be Irish, like myself. I'm Danish, and So I think it would be interesting to look at Irish traditional music a bit from the outside, actually. And maybe help us foreigners understand the tradition a little better.
Yeah.
So it could be nice to know about how you got to know the style of traditional Irish music so well, actually.
Well, I suppose I'd start by saying I've played in so many countries in the world at this stage, and no more than yourself, Rune. There are musicians in all countries now who are fantastic musicians. You know, they really have a great understanding of the music, and they play traditional Irish music really brilliantly. But I suppose it's a situation that's difficult for me to put myself into, really, how difficult it must be sometimes for people living in countries who would say don't have the same access to music as I would have just naturally had growing up. You know, that there was good musicians everywhere, really, you know, as there is today. And I know it can be very difficult for people living in some foreign countries that are very interested in traditional Irish music, but maybe can't just find a direction to go to maybe learn tunes and to be more immersed. And I suppose we spoke about it during the week, even when we were touring together. The big difference now is the online material, isn't it? I mean, it's just it's opened up so many avenues.
Oh, it really has.
Yeah.
Like for me, for example, like, you know, I grew up here in Denmark, like really far away from traditional Irish music.
Yeah.
In a place where nobody played it.
Yeah.
And this was before YouTube, actually.
Yeah.
So like the way I learned it was I could read sheet music, so I could like get the bone of the tune from the sheet music, and then I just listened to a lot of CDs. And then I think YouTube was invented when I was about 17, but it took a good few years before there was really any material, or useful material that you could actually learn from.
Yeah.
But these days it's really, really amazing the amount of stuff you can learn from YouTube.
Yeah.
Also when it comes to Irish music. But I like to see traditional music or music in general as languages, actually. It's like, if you know, it's hard to master a language if you grow up really far from it.
Of course.
You know, you can tell that my English is obviously not as good as my Danish, because I grew up speaking Danish.
Of course.
And I think it's the same with music. If you don't have access to all the sessions and all the great players around you, and you can just listen, you have to learn it in a different way. But it's really hard to master it in the same way. So
yeah, I can imagine. And I suppose advice-wise, obviously, for anybody that would be maybe living in a foreign country that's not in an area that traditional Irish music is very accessible, I think that's the first thing to do, is to reach out to people in the area, or to find out if there are gatherings of Irish musicians or sessions where they can go and listen and become friendly with the people playing and immerse themselves in that little pocket of traditional Irish music. And I think online then, of course, is the only way to go, is to listen and listen and listen. And you know, even my own students at home, when I'm teaching in summer schools and stuff in Ireland, I would always say to the younger kids to listen. I don't know if they're listening enough. And you know, I suppose they've access to so many different types of music now, and it's great that they've been influenced by all kinds of classical and jazz and pop and rock, or whatever the kids are listening to. But it's hugely important to listen to as much traditional Irish music as you can, just during the day when you're driving, at home in your kitchen, wherever it might be. And I suppose I always say to them as well, if they want to go ahead and be a very competent whistle player or accordion player or fiddle player, whatever the case, they really need to listen to some of the great players of that particular instrument also. Yeah. But listening, it's just so important. Yeah. And again, I would say that to anybody in a foreign country who's trying to get immersed in traditional Irish music, to listen to as many CDs as you can, and those ones that you enjoy listening to, obviously, but also maybe try and tune into some of the Irish radio stations, because online now, even local radio stations at home are actually worldwide, And there's some great music on the radio in the evenings at home, in different stations around Ireland. So, yeah, listen.
Yeah.
For as much as you possibly can. Possibly even before you go on to learn an instrument, to allow as much of the music as you can to soak.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good piece of advice seen from my point of view as well as a Danish person playing Irish music. And I think there's another thing that's really important. That's the whole session culture, which we don't have in Denmark. So I would never have been going to sessions when I grew up because there were no sessions in the area where I lived. But it's such a really, really big part of the culture in Ireland.
Yeah.
For me, it's like a music school basically.
Yeah.
It works in a different way than a normal music school, but it is basically a school where you can go and learn.
Yeah, it is.
Pick up a lot of tunes just by being in the pub, and you just learn them just because you hear them there. And then you get to play with a lot of amazing musicians, older musicians who have more experience than you do.
Yeah, it is a hugely important part of our culture, really, I suppose, and particularly our music. But it is fantastic, and it is a fantastic way for young musicians to make that step, because obviously just even when they're very young, 10, 12 years of age, they don't obviously get the opportunity to be going in and out of pubs. But then when they get a little bit older and they're able to go in and actually sit with the musicians then and maybe play the tunes that they've been practicing at home and actually play them in freestyle, if you like, in the middle of a session, that's a huge learning curve.
Yeah.
It's a huge learning curve for musicians who maybe up until that point might have been going to their cultus groups, playing with their siblings at home, maybe listening to their mum and dad at home, their friends or whatever. And yeah, I suppose when you get out into that session scene then, it's a whole new world. And as you said it yourself, it really is, it's a college education in itself of traditional Irish music. And nowadays, of course, all the kids have little recording devices and phones, and any of the musicians who go in and out. So if there is a tune that maybe played during the night that you like or you don't know or a different version, it's just a simple matter of recording and going home and listening to it. So that way it is a college. You're right, it is an education in itself.
And what you just
fantastic, yeah,
totally. And what you just described there just shows that it's so important to listen. As you said.
Yeah,
it's really about listening.
Everything in music is about listening. Even when you're playing with other musicians, I always try and teach people, look, listen to the other musicians and don't become totally task focused on what you're doing. Now, obviously that takes a while to develop and materialize, but listening. We must listen for hours, I think, and we don't do enough.
Very good piece of advice. I have maybe funny question here, but is there anything in particular that you often hear is kind of lacking when you hear when you hear foreigners playing Irish music?
Yeah. Well, no, and again, there are some fantastic musicians in every country in the world. But I suppose sometimes when you do hear maybe non-Irish people, but it's just from exactly what you've said. They haven't had the opportunity to sit with traditional Irish musicians and to get in on that whole swing of the music. So they may be playing the notes correctly and even the phrases correctly, but they just lack that understanding of maybe that natural swing of the music. And you may have heard me even speaking to the students during the week in the workshops. I was trying to encourage them not to learn or think about notes and not to learn or think about phrases. And then when they get to the next stage, not to think about lines of music, but think about the music as a body in itself, and to try and connect with the tune more than connecting with notes and phrases. And I think that attitude in itself leads to playing this lovely musical body of work, which is the tune, and not kind of getting bogged down into bars or phrases and stuff like that. But I suppose sometimes that can lack, but that can lack in anybody's playing, I suppose, not just but I do see the complexities and the difficulties that, people that don't have access to this, what we would have taken for granted all just growing up along, and now even more so, because look at what the kids in Ireland have now. I mean, they've access to the weekly summer schools where they can literally just go away and immerse themselves in high quality lessons for a full week in the morning, and then they're with the other kids in the afternoon playing the sessions, and then if they can stay out for a while at night time playing with the adults. So there's just total immersion there for people growing up in Ireland that maybe other countries wouldn't have those facilities.
No.
And really you highlighted that for me during the week, and it's something maybe I hadn't thought of quite enough before this. But it's a really interesting one, and it is a difficult one. But something obviously that can be done, because there are some fantastic musicians out there now all over the world.
There are, definitely. I'd like to know which whistles you're using these days, because you're really well known and famous whistle player. So I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who'd like to know about, well, how do you choose a whistle and what to look for and all these things.
Yeah, a lot of people are, and when people start out, they kind of just, obviously it's good just to buy a cheap whistle somewhere and practice away at home and see if it's kind of for you. But at the moment, I must say there's so many high quality whistles on the market, and without even mentioning names and stuff like that, people will always make up their own mind. But obviously I've recorded the full album on the McNeela Wild Irish Whistle, and I find them a really, really good instrument. But we've spoke about your instrument even, Rune, during the week, that an instrument that suits one musician, it may not suit the other. And I've played instruments that I really enjoyed, and another whistle player or uilleann piper just might not like that type of instrument. So it really is a personal thing. But I suppose what I would look for in a whistle when I would be buying a whistle or playing a whistle, and I'm really lucky, there are so many whistle makers that send me whistles to kind of maybe ask my opinion and ask me what I feel of the instrument when I play it, and maybe to do a review and stuff like that online. But what I enjoy in an instrument is particularly I'd say when you're talking about whistles, is responsiveness of the whistle. So how responsive is that whistle when I try to do a particular ornamentation or play a particular piece of music, how the whistle responds to that, both in a very quiet playing situation and when I'm really pushing the instrument to the limit. So I suppose the two extremes. Very often in the middle, all the instruments can handle it very well, but it's when you want to go very, I suppose, low in volume and emotion, how it handles that, and the other end of things when you're really pushing it out there. So responsiveness for me is a huge thing in a whistle. And then clarity of tone. And again, it's such a personal thing. How clear do you want that whistle to be? And some people are striving to achieve this perfect clarity, which is lovely, and that's what they like. But I was born and reared playing the old generation whistles, which I loved and still love the sound of. So I like a little reminder almost of the generation whistle, that little husk is still there, and that for what me represents a lovely traditional sound in whistle playing. And I did find that with the Wild Irish, it was like a modern, for me, version almost of that lovely sound that the generation whistle carried for years. And Mary Bergen's playing, I suppose, would immediately jump into mind. And some of my earlier albums were entirely recorded on generation whistles as well. So I love in some of the modern nice instruments that little husk is there. So it's such a personal thing. Back pressure, how much air do you want to use?
I think that's
some are big blowers,
well.
Some are very quiet blowers, and how do you even quantify that? It's just that feeling you get when you're playing the musical instrument. And some are big blowers that like to use a lot of air, some medium, some quieter. So God, there's so many variations as to whether a musical instrument will suit you or not,
Yeah, and when it comes to the blowing, sometimes it comes down to which type of tune you're playing, because I'm not too mad about the really, really soft blowing whistles, because you can kind of overblow
very easily.
It makes a squeaky sound or something like
very
that,
easy.
like a little too easy,
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, if you're playing something really, really soft, it can be nice sometimes that it's really soft blowing whistles.
So there you go. Even the material and the musicians you're working with, or the project at that time that you're working on, can lead you down the road of whistles. And then you have the whole world of timber whistles.
Yeah.
And there's some amazing makers out there at the moment making beautiful instruments. And then you're going into a whole diverse world again of playing timber instruments, you know, and the responsiveness or lack of with some of those instruments can be beautiful, like, you know, so it's a different world again. Sure. So look, I'd advise just that it's a very personal choice, and to try as many maybe musical instruments as you can, and listen again to different musicians in your sessions or on recordings, and just take your pick from that and see which, and eventually you'll stumble on the one that really suits you. Yeah. Obviously for the moment, my thing is that I'm really having huge success with the Wild Irish whistles. For me, they're a fantastic instrument, but you know, it's a very, very personal thing. It really is.
It really is, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we've been talking a little bit about the whistles now, but it could also be interesting to maybe talk a little bit about piping. Could you give us an insight into that world?
Yeah, well, you know, for many years at home, going back, I suppose, and when I started playing the pipes first, the huge problem was the amount of makers. There wasn't many people actually making uilleann pipes, but there's been a huge drive in the country over the last number of years, and thankfully that's something that is, we're in a better situation now, that there are far more makers out there, and the making of uilleann pipes in general has improved hugely. The standard of instrument that has been made now compared to what would have been made even 30 years ago, when I was 40 years ago, whatever, when I was starting to play the instrument, in that number of years the standard of making has become enormous. There are some great instruments out there now. Look, some of the makers have waiting lists and stuff like that, and that's just by the nature, I think, of making such a complex instrument. But yeah, I suppose the fascinating thing in my journey of uilleann piping was when I discovered flat sets, and that changed my whole world of uilleann piping, you know. Yeah. First from listening to flat sets, and then to go into the world of playing the instrument. And you know, I play a flat set now in the key of C. Yeah. And that's kind of my go-to instrument now. I would play in the key of C all the time. And actually, the last album I recorded before this new one was a duet album with myself and fiddle player Dave Sheridan.
Great album.
Yeah, oh thanks. Yeah. And we recorded the whole thing tuned down to the pipes. So Dave tuned the fiddle down and all the other musicians that played on it. So we played in that lovely key of C, which for me it's just a different world.
It is. It's like we've been, because you brought that flat set over here.
Yeah,
and you've been using it for this tour, and I had to borrow a C whistle actually.
Yeah.
So we could play together, and it's amazing how switching key in a tune can almost like change the nature of the tune in some way.
Yeah.
You know, it can sound so different going from, let's say, D and then down to C.
Yeah. Of course, and it changes the way I think we approach music.
Yeah.
Changes the way the musician even plays the music.
Yeah.
Now, even on top of that with the pipes, of course, when you're going into the flat sets, you're going into what we call narrow bore sets, which they're just lazy by their nature, beautifully content and lazy, very forgiving sets to play, and you just kind of want to melt into that lovely warmth of the flat sound, I suppose. And it changes the way you look at the music. Maybe that's just that I'm getting to that stage of my career now. I'm getting old, and I don't maybe want to be playing at 100 miles an hour all the time. But I must say I've enjoyed the flat set so much. So that's a big thing for me. Going from concert pitch to flat has changed my outlook completely.
Yeah.
You know, and even on this new album, there were sets I actually put down with Dave on a B flat whistle, and Dave tuned right down to B and B flat. So you're getting that lovely mellow feel when you're playing the fiddle, and it just makes you want to sit into the music. And the last thing you want to do is play at speed then, you know, and it becomes about phrasing then, and approach, and technique is not even as important when you go down into the flatter world. It's more tone, right, and your approach to the direction of the tunes and stuff. It's fascinating. It's a lovely place to be. But so for me, that was my journey in uilleann pipes anyhow, and the big moment for me was going from concert pitch to flat sets. Right. I enjoy it so much. I really do, yeah. But the world of uilleann piping, a different world again, and we could talk forever about that too.
We could do a whole other interview on that as well.
Yeah,
maybe we'll do that someday.
Absolutely, yeah. Why not?
Fantastic. Well, It's been really great having you on, Brian. Thanks a lot for being up for that, and thanks for a great tour as well. It's been
tour has been great. I just hope for all the people who did come out and look at the gigs and stuff, the response has been great, and I hope we brought something to the people who came out
definitely
to the gigs, and it was just great to get such support, and fantastic to be touring with you guys and to be introduced to Danish folk music, and it's just as all journeys through music are, it's fantastic, it really has. It's been wonderful, and thanks so much.
Likewise. It's been really great.
Super.
Thanks a lot.
Hey, thank you.
All right. Thanks.